first reading of this passage from the Gospel of John, it could appear rather exclusionary and even a bit unkind and even uncaring. I am the true vine, and if you don't remain in me, you will be like a branch that is thrown out and dries up. Those branches are gathered up, thrown into a fire, and burned. Upon this first reading, one could imply that if you don't believe in Jesus, things don't look so good. The text, along with another well-known passage from the Gospel of John, chapter 14, verse 6, "No one comes to the Father except through me," are used on countless occasions to exclude individuals from knowing what Jesus' true message entailed. Jesus' message was way more thoughtful than this, however. In fact, sometimes we need to hear the passage read just a little differently, or at least a retelling of it to get underneath its meaning. Jesus liked to use metaphor, a figure of speech in which a word or phrase literally denoting one kind of object or idea is used in place of another to suggest a likeness, an analogy. Jesus liked to use images that were familiar to his disciples. So consider this retelling as it may assist us in our everyday thinking. Hear these words. "What I most desire for my children is that they live fulfilling and fruitful lives, that they grow to understand what a good and happy life truly is, that they learn the skills to discern what will harm them and what will help them thrive, that when they are in situations where they must choose between what's attractive but destructive and what's unappealing but beneficial, they will choose what is most advantageous to their well-being, choose the things that will nourish them. I hope that they find friendship amongst genuine people who know each other's true worth and who work together to make the world an equitable and accepting place. I long to be in a deep and abiding relationship with them based on compassion, kindness, hope, and love. I long to see them flourish. I am the true vine, and my Creator is the vine grower. You, my friends, my brothers and sisters, my siblings, are the branches, and we belong together. Abide in me as I abide in you, and together we will bear much fruit." To get this true message across, Jesus chooses to use that metaphor that the disciples would be most familiar with, the image of a vine. Vines were everywhere because, frankly, there were grapes everywhere. Wine was served frequently. And why were vines everywhere? It takes a long time to grow grapes. In fact, the first 2 years after a plant is planted, it is pruned so that it will not bear fruit. This allows the roots to become strong so that they can support the plant. And in the spring, the vines are pruned, removing up to 90% of the growth from the previous year to allow for more fruit to grow in that third year when you are able to harvest the fruit. Jesus' words were not meant to be exclusionary at all when he says, "I am the true vine." Instead, Jesus shares this imagery with a scared group of individuals trying to make sense of Jesus' pending death. This 15th chapter of John is part of Jesus' farewell discourse. Jesus is saying goodbye to his friends. The statements made are not to elicit fear. Instead, they are trying to elicit a form of comfort once he is gone. These I am statements communicate a relationship of deep connectivity. Carolyn Lewis writes that, quote, "It is an image of absolute dependence, certain reliance, and a binding relationship that is severed only when we choose to walk away. The only judgment here is on us when we decide to abscond from abiding in Jesus." End quote. Yes, this passage is before Jesus' crucifixion and resurrection. We have gone backwards in time to the night before Jesus is arrested in the garden. It is helpful to remember, however, that Jesus was talking about resurrection long before it even happened. In the season of Easter, Carolyn Lewis writes, quote, "I am the vine and you are the branches," is a paraphrase of "Christ is risen, he is risen indeed," end quote. Jesus must have been exhausted in these days as he was beginning to grieve the loss of his friends, as well as his likely death. Judas has already left, and Jesus is pretty sure that Peter's on the fence and will more than likely deny him. Because Jesus defaults to teacher mode, he uses a familiar image and begins to talk to his friends about what this feels like. Lewis writes, quote, "I am realizing in all of this that I have been both vine and branch, and that life is about going back and forth between the two." In other words, if we decide that these words of Jesus to his disciples are exclusive claims determined to disseminate dread and to insist on insider status, we will miss a lot. A lot about what it means to be a disciple, a believer, a human being. End quote. And Jesus was most certainly a human being and continues to teach us about being human. Saying goodbye is darn hard. And Lewis writes that having in sight a soon-to-be severed relationship brings about a kind of acute atrophy. That looking ahead toward leave-taking brings about its own kind of fear, of change, of loss, of belonging, a loss of being needed, a loss of those who center us and anchor us. That without that connection of the vine and the branches, of the branches with the vine, there's a wilting, a waning, a wanting. I know that withering. Do you? Is it any wonder then that Jesus talks about nurturing the vine, establishing roots, caring for it, pruning when needed, watering, sometimes even transplanting, develops a strong underpinning that allows for growth and allows for growth to flourish. Or as Melissa Early writes on her commentary on this passage, quote, "The vine branch doesn't make grapes on its to-do list. It just makes them because it's part of the vine. And it never makes pears or avocados or olives. When we are connected to Jesus, we bear the fruit of Jesus. And when connected to Jesus, the fruit of our ministry will be good." End quote. These deeply pastoral and compassionate words come to us as Easter people. Even though we find ourselves living both in the shadow of the cross and the light of resurrection, we also know that with God, God's love is freely given, and it is overwhelmingly given. This love that we continue to invest in and share is what will continue to break down barriers within our communities and will allow us ways to be connected through mutuality and respect. I am the vine and you are the branches. And what I most desire for my children is that they live fulfilling and fruitful lives, that they grow to understand what a good and happy life truly is, that they learn the skills to discern, that they're able to discern what will harm them and what will help them thrive, that when they are in situations where they must choose between what's attractive but destructive and what's unappealing but beneficial, they will choose what is most advantageous to their well-being and choose the things that will nourish them. May it be so. Amen.